In 1982, Dario Argento moved into a new phase. Tenebrae has many remnants of old Argento, violent spectacle, murder mystery, and a soundtrack provided by Goblin members. But this film has a self awareness not exhibited by Argento before. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. I'm going to try a slightly different structure today in that I'll have an actual structure. I'll see how this works going forward, but I actually want to break this podcast into three sections. So I'm going to break it down firstly by plot, then by spectacles of violence, and then by, discussion around Argento generally within the context of this film and where his career was, because it's an interesting experience now with the, I don't know if benefit of hindsight's the right thing, because I was certainly not born by the time this film came out, but I first got into Argento and Italian horror films probably around the 2010-ish mark, give or take, maybe take a little bit. And I guess that as a much younger person at the time, obviously, and someone who was still forming my understanding of horror cinema in general, but Italian horror cinema as well, this film to me felt very much in the Argento mold. And obviously over the years, I think I've refined my understanding of it and realized that, this is very much a product of its era and also a product of the context of Argento's career at the time. So I just want to say as a bit of a disclaimer, I don't have a problem with the fact that he changed, because ironically enough, I think one of the criticisms of Argento would, especially his more modern stuff, but even in his heyday, was that he had certain formulaic things that he did that became very predictable. And, I think he sort of burst onto the giallo scene and really significantly helped define what the giallo was with those initial three films, very much forefronted by The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And then by the time Deep Red came around, I think the giallo formula was becoming slightly tired, but he made, I think, the second greatest giallo that exists, but his greatest giallo. And then I think he became quite different with Suspiria and was quite different onwards. But we see sort of remnants of the things, the very giallo-y things that we saw in so many of his original films, but there's a sense that they don't quite belong. So definitely there's a transition, right? There was this sort of historic fact of him not wanting to have Morricone for all of the three of his original horrors, and then finally got Goblin for Deep Red, which upped the energy and the sound and the just general vibe, shall we say. And I feel like you can see an adding on of that kind of thing, from Suspiria to Inferno to Tenebrae to Phenomena, but it feels to me like a slightly in between phase where there's a slightly early 80s feel to this film, but there's still a couple of giallo elements or Argento elements that I don't think always work. But anyway, let's get into the plot, and I'll follow it along from time to time with Wikipedia. But first, I just want to mention that the opening scene is really cool. I'm not gonna go too much further into that. With the reading of the book and then the burning of the book. So Peter Neal, an American writer of violent horror novels, visits Italy to promote his latest work, Tenebrae. Now, I must say, I think that up to a point, this film does characterization really, really well. Like I have always liked the character Peter Neal. I really like the actor. I think the dubbing is of a higher standard than you usually get in giallo films. And he's just got a good look to him, as in, for a start, he looks like a writer. And when there are those scenes with journalists and whatnot, it feels quite authentic, shall we say. Like, I'm actually relatively impressed with it. But the look, I'll get to it probably more in the later section of this podcast, but I guess I have, I guess I'm slightly disappointed by the fact that what they end up doing to his character, I suppose. So we the the weakness of the characterization in this film, however, and you always run this risk in horror films, is that yes, the characterization of Peter is really, really effective. But who else? There are these people that sort of hang around. Um, Daria Nicolodi's role feels very much like she's in it because she's Daria Nicolodi and she ended up in just about all of Argento's films up to a point. There's that guy who's in The House on the Edge of the Park, whose dubbing makes him very different. He's certainly not a smarmy prick like he was in that movie, almost just because of his dubbing. There's that girl who's someone's daughter who is in that lengthy chase scene, initially by the dog. And then there are those two, I think they're prostitutes. I think they're in a relationship. But this is the element of the movie that I think it starts coming apart at the seams a little bit. So it just isn't all that it isn't all that convincing. Like, so look, I notice I've already gone away from the plot, but I think that's okay. And I will go back to it. But so there's those two women where, as far as I'm aware, we're introduced to them at that bar, and one of them's talking about how she's gonna go pick up a man, and one of them's she seems upset about them. It's actually quite interesting in the context of this very modern world where we live in. We've got all these sort of sexually progressive or progressive relationships, and it's like, oh no, I'm totally okay with blah blah blah, and then it turns out that when you're in a relationship, jealousy is a thing. I guess it's sort of interesting from that perspective. But then, they have that lengthy bar scene, and then there's the lengthy murder scene. And I'll discuss that in the visceral section. The problem, though, is there's one scene. Like, the film wants us to care about these characters, but we've already established who Peter Neal is by this point, and we can tell that the film is operating around him. It doesn't seem to be operating around these characters, at least in relation to him at all. So the lengthy scene, it's like, here's a scene that's set up to establish these characters, but it's only for an immediate payoff that they're then going to be killed. So it's just a bit clunky, and I know it's easy to say, oh, well, it's just a horror film, it's blah blah blah. But, well, to be honest, I think that these kinds of things are what separate the really, really good horror films from the okay ones, and this is an okay one. That, oh, well, but we only want to see murder, we only want to see blah blah blah. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you can do both. That's the thing. You can have a coherent, cohesive, and interesting plot without actually and also have the murder, and also have the violence and the excitement. Like, you can actually do both. And I think that a strength of Argento's films, and I've said it, I'm sure, many times on this podcast, was that even though the plots aren't great, he really cared about them, and he really liked them, and he really worked on them. And I think you can already begin to see, and this very much started with Inferno, that his interest in his plots is waning. Um, like it's just not as tight. It's just not as tight as the previous ones. So, um, Murderer sends Neil a letter informing him that his books have inspired him to go on a killing spree. This introduces us to a little bit of self-reflexivity that I think bogs this film down, but I'll get to that later. So I think I think the earlier parts of this film are quite reasonable as a general rule. I like the stuff with the reporter interviewing him and being quite intense. I think it's sort of humorous, and I don't mind that. But there is a slight problem with it though, which is it makes it unbelievably obvious that this guy's up to something, you know. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I suppose, but you know, I think he's well cast. I think he's got a good look, but it's like, put it this way: he plays the role of the reporter and one of the murderers in this film. He looks like a murderer more so than a reporter, I guess. you know. So right. So I think that too much in this film happens around. How can I best put this? It feels as though they started with a really cool concept and they had to fill in the gaps. So the double killer aspect of it. The scenes, like, okay, so the flashback scenes, right? They're incredible, to be honest. That music, I think the camera work is unbelievable. I think the shots just sort of like those guys, like those shirtless guys, you can't see basically above their stomach area. You can't. We have no idea who it's happening, like who that woman puts her shoe into the mouth of. All of that's really, really effective. The music, it's brilliant, but so much care and quality went into constructing those scenes. But for the payoff around them to be, frankly, a bit disappointing. I know there's always a lot of psychosexual stuff going on in Italian horror films, but to be honest, it falls a little bit flat to me. Uh, but like, it's just, it feels like we had the idea for these amazing scenes, and then we had to come up with an excuse to have them. Like, a lot more care went into the actual constructing of the scenes than it did to make sense around the plot, or not make sense. Okay, it's not that it doesn't make sense. It's just that it's a little bit lazy. So then there's the I think it's the daughter of the landlord or whatever. Like, I think someone jokes. I think Dario Argento jokes about her being Peter Neal's new girlfriend, and he says something about that's jailbait or whatever. So Peter Neal makes the realization after she's killed there or whatever, that it's like, oh well, the reporter, he was actually showing an intense interest. That's really, yeah, and it's like that's a cool part of the movie, right? But again, it feels like it comes apart at the seams a little bit, because we're like, but what are the chances that she would actually have ran straight to his house? Like, yes, okay, so he's in the general area and all of that, but it's like, I guess over the years I've become. There are those people that are overly tedious, where although this doesn't make sense and that and blah blah blah. But I think there needs to be a degree of a lack of contrivance in your plot. When there is too much contrivance happening, like she goes to the reporter's house, and Peter Neal makes the interesting realization that he was like, when there's so much of that contrivance going on, it's like, well, the payoff isn't actually as impressive because it's so contrived. if things are really, really tight, then you tend to be. It works, frankly. It actually works. So I don't think that's an amazing moment. Um, then, so don't get me wrong. I know I'm missing quite a few elements of the plot here, but I think I've probably gone a little bit too closely to plot in the past. Um, so they try to tell us that. Well, they don't try to tell us. They sort of do tell us quite directly. Um, you know, when the reporter gets killed, like, oh, I killed them all. I killed them all. Like, okay, okay. Um, so the problem with this plot twist, if you want to call it that, when it becomes a bit of a twist slightly later, is one, it's not hidden from us at all. Like it really doesn't seem to be hidden from us at all. Um, but also, it's actually not a good twist. I don't think. I don't think it's a good twist at all. Now, one of the big issues with this film, I think, and I do apologize for being so critical. The section when I discuss the violence will hopefully be a little bit more positive. One of the issues with this film is that I think the eventual killer, all right, either killer would be good, actually. I'm okay with the reporter, but they make it too obvious. And they don't make it too obvious with Peter Neal, except that it is an obvious conclusion that one might draw. Because there's a certain self-reflexivity and self-awareness about this film. That's okay. The problem for mine, though, is I don't think that it's interesting enough that it's one killer and then we have another killer. Like, the explanation for mine is really ordinary. Like that Peter Neal had experienced some violence in the past, and seeing violence this time triggered a memory and all that. Like, nah, to me that's a soft moment in the script. I think that's poor. I don't think that's well thought through. And I don't think it would be a bad idea if, say, the film had implied that it was the reporter, and then it turned out that it wasn't the reporter. That would have been a reasonable twist. So it's a sort of bizarre device where it feels in a way like the reporter is actually not a bad selection for the killer. But then by the time we're at the end, we're like, was the film actually that committed to that idea? Or was that merely a way to... Was it just a diversion tactic? Because, look, for mine, the film has two very clear killers, which it does, obviously. But, like, as in, even within the philosophy of the film, it feels like they're very much two killers. That you've got one who is influenced by violence, and I think there's a certain meta element to that, being around violence too much. And another that some people have an uncomfortable attraction to violence. So on the one hand, we might say one is Argento having a dig at himself, and then on the other, Argento's having a dig at all the people that are so fascinated by his film. So it's interesting in that regard. I'm just not sure that having both works for either. I think the fact that they're almost like they're like the two half revelations of the film. And because they're so sort of evenly spread out in terms of that level of killer credibility, if you want to call it that, there's not really any... I think the two just take away from each other a little bit. And also, as I think I said earlier, yes, Peter Neal's a great character, but I think he's a great character as an innocent writer. I really do think that works. So when you get to the end and he's all giggling and laughing, it's like, yeah, it's well shot. It's a terrifying looking scenario. I think they do it well to make him seem that way, but I don't buy Killer Peter Neal. I buy author Peter Neal. I think it's just a lot, you know, it's just a lot more convincing. Um, so I do want to give the plot broadly, though, a little bit of love and a little bit of credit. Um, the fact is, yes, there's a bit of contrivance going on, but to be fair to it, I think there's quite a lot of there's a good sort of flow to the narrative, I will say, and by having um, the double killer plot, I mean, you could argue one half of the film is quite succinctly about the first killer and the discovery of that. And then the second half of the movie is about another one. So it means that there's always something going on. The mystery is always quite uh, on the forefront of our minds. So the plot never ceases to be interesting. Um, So I'm pretty happy with that. I think the atmosphere is really good. Uh, I think it's quite a convincing scenario, right? It feels quite genuine. He lands. Does he land in Rome? Whatever he gets off the plane. No, it seems to be shot at actual airports. Um, it's got what am I trying to say? It's got a good feel, right? Certain films you want to be there, you want to be involved, and I think at his best, Argento was always that. You like the settings that he picks. I feel pretty happy with that in regard to this film. I guess what I'm saying is he gets a lot out of elements of it right, but it's just not as tight as he once was because I don't. What's the best way to put it? Um, well, one thing I'll note actually, I've just thought I think it's a good idea. I think I'll do the Argento specific section next, um, but and then I'll discuss the violence a bit after that. But the best way to put it is that there's still a story, there's still a flow, but Argento is caring less and less about the construction of his stories, and that's part of what I'll discuss in the next section. Okay, so Argento in decline doesn't care as much about his plots anymore, and again, it's got all the features, right? It's got at least a relatively likable character. It's got flow. It's got mystery. It's got interest. It's got twists and turns, and it's got surprising conclusions. But just how much does Argento care about his plot here versus how much does he care about making a point? So I am particularly ready to be annoyed, shall we say, about self-awareness and meta-ness and self-reflexivity in film and television, because for some reason it's a bit of a modern concept. It happens a lot now in all kinds of different shows, and I think the annoying thing about it is it's almost like for people who let's say don't know that much about what they're talking about, if they can recognize that, oh no, that makes sense because it's being meta, it's like, well I know what I'm talking about, so it's actually really interesting. And I'm like, as a general rule, I actually think the concept of meta is a bit shite. I'm not saying it can't be done skillfully, and I'm also not saying that if Argento was going to do it, that this wasn't the right time of his career to do it. He's now he's over 10 years into his directorial career. He's certainly been there and done that. He's had a lot of different films that have a lot of violence in them and all that kind of thing. So that's perfectly okay. My problem, though, is that just doing it doesn't earn you any sort of respect. Also, for mine, it's just way too on the nose. So there's that scene with that female reporter where I think it might be when maybe there's some, is there like a camera recording them at some point, or maybe at least she's got a little audio recorder or something like that. I don't know, but like they seem to be having a cordial discussion, and then suddenly she starts asking, "Oh, but what about your thought? It's just a bunch of violence against women and blah blah blah." Now, I'll defend this slightly before I criticize it. He's very clearly trying to make the point, and in that way, you probably need to make the point as universal as it can, because he wants, as in Argento, seems to want the viewer to be aware that he's having a go at people who have a go at him. So the words that she uses are very, very cliche, very generic. And given that as a general rule, I think the dialogue and script in this film isn't that generic, I can sort of accept that perhaps they were trying to make that point. You know, the problem though is like, if you're making a film that there's at least enough effort in the story for us to defend the fact that there is a story going on, I'm like, well, it takes you out of it a little bit, you know, like it really does. So then it becomes like, okay, so is this a film about Peter Neal and this reporter and the story, or is it Argento having a little bit of a whinge or making a little bit of a point? And to be honest, it feels more like the latter. Obviously, it's a bit of both. I get that, but it feels too much like the latter to me. So, like, I understand, but this is a really silly comparison, but the people who like the Barbie movie like the lengthy speech of that mother character because it really rings true. And the people that hate the movie hate that speech. Now, as it happens, I actually quite like the movie but hate that speech. And the reason is, one, it's just whinging, silly SJW nonsense. But two, the film doesn't earn it. Just about all the things that she says in quite a long speech are not really depicted in the film. So it makes me think, well, why didn't the director of that film just do an interview saying this stuff rather than making a film about it? And it reminds me a little bit of Tenebrae. So it's like Argento clearly wants to make the point because Peter Neal, when he's asked that, he sort of pushes back and says, no, it's not about that at all. And which I like because that's how I would defend Argento, or at least I would defend him by saying, well, yes, I use the World War II analogy all the time, but, making a movie about World War II does not mean you approve of World War II. And you could actually make such accusations against literally any film ever made. Like every film depicts some kind of tension or some kind of dispute. If it didn't, why would you bother making the film? Might as well just, do 90 minutes of watching butterflies fly around, So like the putting something in your story is not an approval of that thing. And that is how I would defend Argento. Because I think there is plenty of nuance going on in his films. And I think he is quite critical of the way men are to women and all that kind of stuff quite often. In his films. So I would absolutely defend him that way. But I guess my point would be, we as Argento fans like Argento before you engage in that stuff. Like all that stuff's part of him, but we like him anyway, okay? So we want to watch an Argento film. We can defend him against what we might consider unjustified criticisms in our own time. But then it's like, yeah, but I don't want to hear you defending yourself in within your own film, Dario. I would prefer to watch the film, and you can go defend yourself in interviews or whatever. Um, and also, linking back to Barbie, of course, I just don't think the film earns it. In that, if you look at the actual the killings in the film, the plot of the film, the intrigue that is undeniably in the film, uh, it still doesn't. It's not really different to his other films in that way. Like he still has the same, uh, arguably sexualization of some women in certainly in one of the killings. She's naked, and you sort of feel like she doesn't need to be. It's just the Argento maybe thought she looked better naked than not naked. That kind of thing. So, and we've had moments like that in his past films. A lot of the murder victims are women, a higher portion. Their killings tend to take longer than the men, and this is all true in this film, right? It's all true. So now, by all means, I'm not suggesting that he make it different to make a point or do less of it. It's just that when you take put it this way, when you take out the social commentary that's very, or the Argento based social commentary that is very blatant in the film, if you took that away, it doesn't change the film at all. And it's the same with Barbie. I'll move away from that film now. I might discuss that in a different podcast. It's on the Horror Film Science podcast at some point, maybe. But it's like, if you're going to do your little self-aware gripes, and by all means do them, I think it has to be done in a way that advances the plot. Like, in what way does that conversation with the woman and then with the reporter, in what way does it advance the plot? What does it add to the actual story that we didn't have otherwise? Because from what I can gather, nothing. It's just there, and then the story continues independent of it. So, I've gone on about it, and it's maybe not horrific, but it is unquestionably a little bit annoying. I don't want to be taken out of my film watching experience, and I think that's what annoys me about Meta, and also because it's not clever. I think to be honest, I think that's what annoys me about the people who think Meta is amazing, right? Just because something is self-aware doesn't make it clever. In fact, it's almost always evidence that it's the opposite of clever, because it's essentially just a moment where the film goes, "Hey guys, here's what I think about stuff." So yeah, we've all got opinions, and just because it's meta and you maybe agree with the opinion, that doesn't make it good or clever. So, so I made the point about the characters just being there to be killed, and that's not made any better by the fact that some of the characters are there for quite a while. Like the little blonde guy who's got a British accent, again, the guy from the House on the Edge of the Park. He, for all the world, feels like he should just be in it for about 1 minute. He hangs around this film like a lost puppy. Like the way he's so excited to just be there, looking like him and Peter when they go to the reporter's house. It's like, oh, this is really exciting. It just seems like a little kid. And he also seems a lot shorter than he is in House on the Edge of the Park. I don't know if the actors are taller or something. He's just got a bit of a presence in that film that he doesn't have in this one. So he just feels like he's there to be killed eventually, and it's like, are we sad? Do we care about him? There's even that moment where I think the girl who gets chased down by the dog and then killed by the reporter, I think she is his girlfriend. But there's even a moment where she has to go downstairs or something, and he's like, "Oh, I'll come with you," and he smiles. He'd be wagging his tail if he had one. And I'm like, what who is this guy? He's just very annoying. Again, surplus to requirements, other than he's another person they can have killed. But just introduce him for one scene in that case. It'll be better, because then we don't have to deal with him. So him as well. Now, this was actually the moment that I actually thought I wanted to break this film into sections because I want to have a whole uh, section talking about potential Argento decline and the fact that there are things within this film that are there because we we're used to them. Now, the the staple it's definitely a staple of Argento's giallo films, and he did it. I haven't seen his most recent film, but he certainly did it even in like his films that were in this century, his giallo that were this century. The whole I remember I saw this scene, but I just can't remember how it went, and it is a bit lame, but when we like something and we like the giallo, myself and presumably all you listeners, it's like, you know what, but that's what I expect. I feel safe because that's the thing that I like about this genre and I want it there. And also, sometimes it was done with great effect. It was done with great effect in Deep Red. Uh, no, no doubt at all. I think it was also done with great effect in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. One, because I think that was either the first or at least definitely a formative element of the genre because it was the start, but also because it was shot very well. Like, I remember the first time I ever watched The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and presumably I don't think I'd seen many Jolly at that time. I remember before they were even doing this, something wasn't right about that thing. I was doing that myself, right? And I think from memory, I think that I saw that the knife was in the woman's hand and then decided, nah, I might have seen that wrong. So I saw the revelation, but I ignored it because because it was so quick. And that's when Argento does those, or the Giallo does those first scene revelations or early scene revelations really, really well. When they literally just show you the conclusion, but very quickly, but not. It's not hidden necessarily. It's that your eyes are diverted, like they do with the mirrors in Deep Red. It's like literally they reveal in both of those scenes. The killer is literally revealed in that scene right at the start of the movie, and to me, that's really cool. I'm a big fan of that. So Argento continued using that technique in his giallo films to varying effectiveness, but I'm happy with it being there. But he puts it in this film in a way that like it actually shouldn't have been. So it's bizarre, actually. So if we remember the moment that the Peter Neal and the little puppy dog are looking, they're doing their little stakeout in the backyard of the reporter's house. And Peter Neal disappears and presumably goes off and goes off and kills a reporter, but we don't know that it's a reporter, right? Sorry, we don't know that it's Peter Neal that goes and kills him at this point. I'm pretty sure the scene where just before he kills the reporter with the axe to the head, we hear quite clearly that the reporters say, I did it, I killed them all. I think we see it happen. Or at least when the puppy dog guy remembers, we see it. But unlike when Argento does this well, we get all the information, but we get it from a different perspective. And then when the revelation happens, we get the proper perspective. And so for that reason, I'm guessing that maybe we just hear the reporter say it, but it's not clarified. So there's a couple of issues with this, right? Maybe three. First, it's quite obvious. Like, it's never been unclear to me that the reporter was the killer at that point in the film, right? Second, like because they don't hide it well enough. Second, I can't quite put my finger on what happened in that scene. The one, we give it to the puppy dog guy who isn't the main character, and they pretty much always give that to the main character. But it's also that the point of that device is that it runs throughout the length of the film. But we're well into the film by the time we have that scene. And then I reckon it's only about 5 or 10 minutes, like maybe slightly more than that. But it's not very far further in the film at all, where he's piecing it together and he's remembering, oh, it actually was the reporter who was the killer. And then, who killed him is the question. Well, it's like, well, there's a few, it's like, one, that was obvious, okay. Two, it's no revelation for us, even on the off chance that as a viewer you were fooled by that. I'm not even sure the film was trying to fool you, but let's say you were fooled. You've only got a few scenes in between it to reflect on it anyway. So that's the best thing about like a twist that's set up at the start of a movie, as happens in the Giallo. You go, oh, wow. And the film's been maybe misleading you, but giving you clues. It's like, well, there's almost no film in between these two things happening. So it doesn't add anything to the film. But then finally, maybe not finally, but the fact is, right? Well, I'm pretty sure the fact is, we know that this is the reporter's house. So the girl goes in there. She's chased by the dog. She goes in there and we see it's the reporter's house. I don't think it's unclear. And she sees all the newspaper clippings and she starts grabbing the evidence and whatever. Okay. Again, I'm at pains to emphasize this. I don't believe the film tries to indicate in any way that this isn't the reporter's house, which is fine. But that's the revelation that the reporter is the killer, right? That is like we already know the reporter's the killer. Or at least if the film's then going to say the reporter isn't the killer, then that undermines the tension in the moments where the girl is getting the photos and she's putting them in her shorts or whatever. Like they're quite good scenes. We know that this is the house of the killer and we know that this is the house of the reporter. So when you reveal later that actually it was someone else that the reporter was the killer, but then blah, 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 it's like, no, but there was already a limit on the interest within that. And if anything, you've taken the interest away. So it's an Argento trope that he stuck, that usually goes into the start and end of his movie and in some way controls the movie. That is the uncertain thing that the person has seen. Yeah. But instead they stick it in the middle of the movie and solve it in the middle of the movie. Right? It doesn't add anything. It really, really doesn't add anything. And they give it to a very, very weak character and it just slows down the plot. But then also the line, well, then who killed him? He says to himself. Like, well, yes, except given we saw he was killed by someone that wasn't him, we already know that we need to find out who killed the reporter. So adding that line as if it's trying to be super duper interesting doesn't work because it's not giving us anything we didn't know. But what's more, the film probably would have been more interesting if the reporter never was the killer in the first place. Like, imagine if it had been, or a lot of the evidence had suggested it was the reporter, that the way they shoot, like, okay, there could be a double meaning. I think there was an opportunity for a double meaning, right? She goes in, there's these pictures of dead bodies, and we know it's the reporter's house, and it's like, oh, wow, the reporter is a killer. And then, but in the excitement, and let's not forget, she's just been chased for quite a long time by that dog. And then we see her killed. And it's all very exciting. And the film could quite easily backtrack after that and say, well, I mean, he was a reporter, right? Of course he's going to have these pictures and he's following the case. Now, that would have actually been a really I'm not a massive fan of the whole subverting expectations thing, but it would have been quite an interesting way to subvert our expectations if they had used the excitement, right? Because we're quite excited. It's scary, and this attractive girl, she's being chased, and then then she finds a place to hide, and then she finds that she's not in a safe place that she's hiding, and then she tries to escape, and then she can't escape, and then she dies, and it's like within all that, it would be easy to go, oh my god, the killer must be the reporter because there's that information, and trick us with the fact that reporters do investigate things, so maybe what we saw was just him investigating. Now, the film had the opportunity to do that, I think, but decided against it. And then we end up with two killers, which to me is just a little bit silly, So, a couple of opportunities missed. So, I guess I'll just put a conclusion on that. I hate the two killers trope. I've hated it since I saw it in Scream, even though that was a piss take of a film, and by the way, is extraordinarily overrated. But there's a reason why I don't like the two killers trope, and it's because the rules of engagement for people who enjoy murder mysteries, be they silly little British crime dramas or good British crime dramas or horror movies or whatever they might be. The rules of engagement are that we're trying to work out who it is and you're trying to give us enough clues, but you still want us to be surprised at the end. You add another killer, you can just do whatever you want, right? Like, oh, but it can't, like, because you can mislead people. Like, oh, hang on, but this person was here when that one happened, so it can't have been them. It's like, well, you're just cheating them, right? And now, to defend Tenebrae, it doesn't do that exactly. It just has two stories. Like the first half of it is that he's a killer, that the reporter's the killer, and the second half is that the writer saw that he was a killer and decided that it's going to trigger him. Now, can we just say that that's a bit silly? Like, is that not Argento overthinking a little bit? Like, is it not slightly maybe over meta? That, like, is he trying to imply that, yes, well, because when people see violence, they commit more violence? Like, is that the annoying social commentary that he could have put into an interview? Perhaps. I think probably. And I don't really want to deal with it. But also, I think the real problem with it is the film tries to give the illusion of cohesion, right? We have the cool flashback scenes with the girl and the POV shots of him killing her and all that kind of thing. But it's not actually cohesive, right? Flashbacks that happen throughout the course of the film, and then we get a revelation. It's meant to like sort of make a bunch of sense. But he actually was triggered by this violence that he saw, and then he became the killer. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but the film doesn't really go to the trouble of explaining that properly, I don't think. Like, we don't know anything about this young version of Peter Neal, and they don't fill in any of the gaps between him and this person now, and the whole simple act of annihilation thing. Any embarrassment could be swept aside with a simple act of annihilation. The problem, and you know what, the film would be a lot better if they'd bothered with this. If they had, at some point in the actual plot, not the flashback, but the plot that we get before we see the reporter get killed, if they had shown in any way that Peter Neal was the kind of person who hates embarrassment, right? If they had just done one or two scenes doing that. Because here's the thing, right? When people, when his suitcase gets trashed or whatever, which could be quite embarrassing. Like there's a bit of you don't like the idea that someone's gone through your stuff. That is a bit embarrassing. Shouldn't they have taken the opportunity for him to like flip out when that happened? Just so later they could go back and say that, Peter Neal, he's not good with embarrassment, right? Because that is the explanation. But it's like the film is entirely committed for the first half of the film to the reporter story. They don't use any of the first half of the film to justify that Peter Neal is going to get triggered. They just trigger him midway. So it ends up basically that the second half of the film has nothing to do with the first half, apart from the flashbacks. And this could have been fixed easily, right? There's a lot of fluff in the film. There's a lot of the build up to those two prostitute characters. You could cut all that. And, so I hope my point's been well made here, because I just think you would justify the ending a lot better if, think about it, guys. The end with the revelation that it was Peter, and the explanation from the cop, I think, who says that, he was the embarrassment, whatever, is simply the whole explanation is we had flashbacks to when he was humiliated, and he got triggered by the fact that he saw violence again, and that it was like repressed violence or whatever. But nothing about Peter's characterization until the last scene that we see of modern Peter, who's quite a calm, author-seeming character. Nothing about that actually implies that he's a psycho. And I'm not saying they have to over-imply it. They just need something, right? Some kind of evidence there. But they don't have it, and it annoys me, and it's disappointing, because I think, this film's nearly great, but there are aspects of it that they don't quite know. And then also just on the ending, it is pretty well shot, and I'll talk about it momentarily in the visceral section, the discussion of the spectacles of violence, shall we say. But fake outs are just a little bit silly. And the thing is that, if we consider the idea that that he's actually, we think he's dead. We think he's dead for about 1 minute. Just like, oh, it was the reporter that's the killer, but now we're moving on. It's like, no, these could actually be really interesting devices if you actually gave more time to them. Argento probably has a bit of a problem with this in the 80s, actually, now that I think about it, because they do it with opera as well, where they imply they imply that the killer is burned to death, and then it's like about 2 minutes later we find out he's not. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to have a few scenes at least? But anyway, that's enough of the criticisms. Let's move on to the violence in this film to conclude this discussion. All right. So let's finish up with some discussion of the violence in this film. And it's one of clearly the core components of the Argento zeitgeist, if that's the right word. And it's nearly faultless, to be honest. I think that it's quite impressive that after all that time, or after all those movies that he made, where he's had some extraordinary scenes, that he's able to produce some really, really effective, well thought out kills, but also the tension, So, as I said, I'm very critical of the build up to the prostitute scene, but the actual construction of their death scene is just fantastic. Right, I feel like it's a bit Hitchcock inspired, the way the film, the way the camera pans out of or moves out of the building. I think that it's pretty effective. There's that weird shot where the first one who dies gets like her shirt slashed a little bit, and then she's like looking at the killer through the shirt. And the use of the music in this scene to build up the tension that Goblin score, or I shouldn't say Goblin score. I think it's 3 of the Goblin members. So it's basically Goblin, right? I don't think Goblin, maybe they weren't together in an official capacity, but it's mainly Goblin, right? and the just the camera work. I think the second one, she gets like maybe she gets her hair grabbed from behind. Um, it's a very confusing scene. You don't know where the killer is. It's quite possible that he's in impossible places. Who seems to appear in moments where he shouldn't, based on where the characters have been looking. But I don't even care. The actual use of the music in this scene is brilliant. The use of the camera is brilliant. The kills themselves are fine, I guess, but it's just, we talk about spectacles of violence. This whole scene is a beautifully constructed spectacle of violence, and you know, if there's any doubt that you're watching an Argento film, or even any doubt that whether Argento's still got it, so to speak, um, at this point, uh, that's well and truly answered by this scene, and I love it. Um, Another scene that I think leads to sort of concludes with the best moment in in this film, and I do want to give a special shout out to to the Goblin people who made this music, because it adds an energy that, look, I think often scores are shot after the film, but there are moments in this film where it feels like the scene was shot with the music in mind. So, um, I find it very funny the way the girl, like, I think the dog comes and scares her, and then she like she responds to it. I think she like bangs on the fence or something, which is funny because this is something I've done in real life. Used to have this dog that always would. I'd walk past this house and this dog would jump at me. I'd always forget it, and then once I walked past and it was asleep and I barked at it. Probably a bit of an embarrassing story, but I got back the dog, and that's all that matters. But anyway, it's quite humorous the fact that the dog actually chases after her. Now, it's lengthy, this scene, and it's always interesting in these types of films where like an animal will be being shown to be aggressive, but then it's like the generic shots they get of it, like when it comes out and it's running after her, it's not running after her in that dog hunting technique that dogs have when they're hunting. It's just sort of running, but that's okay. Chases her into the house. Now, I already talked a little bit about her finding the images the um, of the dead women. Um, what is you can see that this is directed by the Suspiria guy. Like they show the shots of that. I guess I think it's either an entry to the house or another room. It's got that small little staircase, but it has that sense of claustrophobia, like the walls are closing in, like it's tension deluxe. It's absolutely fantastic. Um, when she goes into the main area, I think this is a wonderfully constructed. It's a great house to have shot it in. To be honest, that open space, but that gives the sense that someone could be watching you from anywhere. So open space in one sense, you know, suggests there's a lot of places to escape, but in another sense suggests there's a lot of places you can be attacked from. And she is seen by the killer. Now, this is my favorite moment of the film, right? The POV shot from the killer when she starts escaping. It's so unbelievably effective with the music in the background and the way she is looking at the killer or the camera. And she goes and opens the sliding door. There's just something about the pacing of the way the camera follows her, and then she closes it as well. Like, it's like, this is just magnificent, right? It's like, okay, all right, maybe not everything about this film's good, but it's still bloody Argento, right? It's still what I came here to see. Absolutely magnificent. I love it. And then you see that it's closed on. The door's closed on his hand, and then he goes and picks up, what is it? Is it the axe? Does he kill her with the axe? magnificent. Just magnificent. Go watch it. Go watch it again. It's just a fantastic scene. You get the terror. You get the realization that she's in trouble. You get the energy that's given both by the music and by the way it's shot. And then you get the payoff with her being killed, of course. Um, uh, the axe to the head for the reporter is cool, I suppose. The strangulation of the puppy dog guy is as boring as his character was, so I'm not going to give that much credence. Um, and then the final scene. So, um, this is probably being super critical and maybe unnecessary, but I think I would say that that thing that he's killed with, that big, sharp structure thing, I think it would be better if that was poetic in some way. Like, it looks, this probably sounds super tedious, but it looks like the kind of thing that would be a reference to something else in the film. Like, I don't know, if it was visually more similar to the heel that gets stuck in his mouth in the flashback scene or something. Like, there's something about that structure that feels like it's there for poetic reasons, but it's not. It's just this thing that he can be killed with. So, okay, whatever. When it goes through him, though, it's unbelievable. It really is. So I was critical of the fake out, and I still am. But the actual way that they shoot that scene and the way he cuts his own throat is really effective. But specifically, what I want to give a shout out to in this scene is when the reporter goes back in to the house. And again, don't worry too much about perspectives, because if Peter Neal's really behind him, then I think there's a good chance he would have seen him there or heard him walk behind him. Whatever. First time I ever saw the movie, it felt like something was off. I think it's Peter Neal's ear, or at least maybe the side of his head or something, that you can just see slightly behind the cough. And who knows? Maybe it was just hard to get the shot. Maybe they wanted him completely hidden behind the cop. But I'm glad that he wasn't, because then when he kneels down and you see Peter Neal behind him, one, it's a great shot, but two, you probably need a shot of that quality in order to actually justify the insanity. Now, this is something that I want to actually give quite a bit of credit to Argento on as well. Whilst I'm not convinced about them deciding that Peter Neal is insane, largely because they don't justify it at all in the film, this whole scene is quite insane. The structure he's killed with is, who the fuck would make that? And also, it's worth mentioning, it kills him and he deserves it. But whatever moron created that thing and made it big and heavy, like, they were asking for trouble. Like, who the hell would make this structure? It's just asking to fall over and go through someone's stomach or neck or face. But the structure itself is quite insane. The use of the music is insane. The decision to have that little knife with the spurting blood, insane. Again, why does he have that? Does he know he's going to need it? I don't know. Is there something in him, in the way his character is constructed, that would have that? I mean, maybe he's a novelist who writes about serial killers. I mean, again, maybe, but I'm not that convinced. But, the way he's cowering in the corner and explaining to us about what happened, nah, not that convinced. Although he does look a bit crazy, so that's fine. But yeah, I thought I'd go through that little section, because ultimately the violence in this film is very, very effective. It's not Argento's best work by any means. I would never accuse it of being that. However, it feels like it's beginning to change. My memory of Phenomena is that it's a very good film, but it's very, very different. So that's the one I'm going to be doing next month. But it feels like we're now transitioning away from great Argento into something else. But it's nice to know that even when we were in that mode, that he was still able to produce some unbelievable scenes, because the quality of the actual violence in this film is those scenes. I couldn't have imagined them shooting them any better. So, congratulations to Dario on that, at least. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode and this new structure. I've added a few little extra musical cues, and we'll see if we'll see how that if I continue with that. But I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Italian Horror Guy podcast. Join me next month. I'm the Italian Horror Guy.